Welcome to the Journey of Growth podcast, episode 39. I'm ThE, the host of this event, which is created so myself and others can share perspective on growth in hopes that one another's journeys will be relatable, establishes awareness, and inspires listeners to adopt and maintain such behavior. The definition of growth is the process of developing new skills, attitudes, actions, or reactions that can have a beneficial impact on your life and increases your overall well being. If you would like to be a guest on the show, you're invited to do so by reaching out to me on Instagram at Kite Raps or on Facebook at Kite Smith. You can also leave a comment in the comment section on the YouTube channel, and I will attempt to contact those who are interested. And the intention for the podcast is to um, engage or initiate engagement in an unknown, unexpected circumstance, which can result in the enhancement of self identity and self awareness, which can inspire growth in the individual. So, and if you would like to pose questions to myself and the featured guests, you're invited to do so through Instagram or in the chat for the live stream on YouTube, as well as Facebook, and I can um, present these questions to the guests as well. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce today's featured guest. His name is Mr. Colin Ehara. Hello, Colin. How are you?
Peace, Keita. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I appreciate you engaging in in this experience with me, and I hope that we can inspire growth in one another's through our expressionism. Um, so, with that being said, my first question is, what can you tell me about yourself?
Um, I, man, well, I guess the first thing that popped in my head was that I'm a dad of two beautiful children. Aya, who's 7, Mayadi, who's 3. Um, I am a husband to my partner M, and we, if you could believe it, have been together since 2001,
Mm,
and married for 17 years. Um, I am deeply, deeply fortunate to have an incredible family, community, supporting me. And, I'm sure as we kind of, get into things, I'll talk about all of them. I'm
yes.
also an educator. Um, uh, I have been an educator for almost 20 years, about.
Mm,
Um, and I was everything from a basketball coach and a after school, educator to an English teacher. I was a dean of students, and now am a professor of ethnic studies at Diablo Valley College.
wow, that's amazing. I admire your ambitiousness and to engage in these varieties of activities. And I hope that you experience self fulfillment and an increased awareness of who you are through these engagements, which I hope to learn and discover more about as well.
Thank
My next question is, what would be your perspective on growth?
you. Well, what's popping into my head is one of my dear friends, Lutricia White, who is a restorative practices coordinator, who supports tons and tons of students at the school I used to work at, Aspire Richmond Cal Prep. She's one of the most kind of brilliant youth advocates, educators that I've ever known. She is a mother. She is um, so many, wears so many different hats. But I think she one thing that she would say that stuck with me forever. She said, show me somebody that's done or has no room for growth, and I'll show you there's someone that's 6 feet under the ground. Right. And so when I think of growth, right, it's something that I'm, always pursuing. I think that then I think of one of my mentors, Dr. Alison Tintianco Cubales, who's a professor at San Francisco State. where I did a master's in Asian American Studies, and she says pain plus love equals growth, right? And so when it comes to I would say discomfort is something that's direly necessary to growth. But I also think support and being resourced is direly important to growth as well, right? And so I think if you're kind of like just only kind of um, given lots and lots of support but never being pushed, right? That you're not really going to grow. But if you're like only struggling, right, and don't have love, support in your life, then it's going to be really difficult to grow also. All
Mm,
right, as someone who's worked with young people, and as a dad, I'm thinking about these things constantly. And how am I supporting my students in their growth? How am I trying to balance um, you know giving them that pain, that discomfort, that challenge, right, while also ensuring that they're supported in ways that will ensure their success. And it's rarely easy, right, to figure that out, particularly when I have 200 students, that all have
mhm,
different needs and life experiences and personalities and identities and all these different things. But I do my absolute best in that direction. I think it's really really dope that you've centered this space and this podcast around this concept, because I think I would argue that we're in a particularly like political like point of turmoil around um, a lot of folks having power that don't feel like they have any room for growth, and I think that perfectionism and folks like thinking they're perfect or like or even thinking that anybody can be perfect
mhm,
can do a lot of damage, right? And so I love the concept of growth because it implies that like you can always be better, right? And what you're saying in that too is you're acknowledging like I'm not perfect, um but I want to try to be better each day.
mhm.
But yeah, those are at least some initial thoughts.
Wow, I appreciate your perspective, and I can relate to some of the things you said. Some of the things I hope to relate more to, but yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm definitely going to ask for the things I don't, I'm not aware of. I want to definitely touch on those things, um, but I appreciate that. And then my next question is, how are you growing?
Man. Well, if I'm putting that pain plus love equals growth equation into my life, I think the pain aspect I would say comes from uh, social injustice, legacies of oppression, whether that's racism and white supremacy, sexism and violence against women, misogyny, those kinds of things, homophobia and violence towards queer folks, classism in the ways that capitalism um, exploits the vast majority of humanity so that a very, very small portion of the human population can become ridiculously wealthy and while destroying uh, the earth and moving us towards global ecological collapse. And so I think I regularly feel it's a regular battle for me to like stare that in the face, muster the courage to do all to stare all those kind of horrific things in the face, and not become defeated or nihilistic or hopeless. And I think that the way that I grow is I remember that there's tons and tons of people that are working to identify and resist injustice and resist dehumanization and violence, and that want a more just, humane, and sustainable society and world. And I'm very fortunate to have family and community that really share a lot of love with myself and with each other, And I think all of those things help me to grow constantly. I think my children, and becoming a dad has helped me in ridiculous ways to grow. In my own journey, as far as like, they teach me all the time. Like when I'm getting frustrated, or uh, feeling stuck, or like I'm not sure what to do. I try my best to like frame it as an opportunity to be like, okay, like what is this, this struggle moment trying to teach me, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and slowly trying to figure out, what that is. Like where am I coming up short? And I think particularly as a teacher, it's like, um, you know, um, you are you an MC? I see the Kite raps.
Yeah, I do rap.
Yeah, right. And so, I've heard, for many years, it's been a long time, but I made music for a long time, and I was an MC and a poet, and love to write. But I had a line when I wrote a song about being a teacher, and I said, as a pedagogue kicking some metacognition, my vocation is locating what my repertoire is missing. Right. And so, like, in teaching, I think my growth piece is always like, what is it that I'm missing? What is it that I still need to learn so that I can get better and better and better? And I think that, the trick, and this comes from one of my mentors, Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, who I worked with at East Oakland Scepter College at Fremont High School, a long time ago at this point. But one thing he would say is, he was like, it's, a lot of the growth stuff is around how can you kind of balance, almost like on a tightrope, like, if you have like confidence over here and then you have humility over here, it's like, how do you like, stay there and not like be so confident that you become arrogant? How do you tap into humility, but not so much that you start to doubt yourself? Right. And if you can kind of walk that tightrope of like having confidence and also humility, right, that's like a really good formula for continued growth, in whatever it is that you're pursuing.
Mm. That's very profound. Based on your experiences and your perspective at present, based on the things that you have engaged in, be it your with your children's and their relationships,
Mhm.
to the experiences with other people's children as a professor, and also discovering the outcomes based on your actions.
Yeah.
And that's pretty insightful. And I think where I relate to you, or my perspective on what you were saying, is especially when it comes to that thin line of humility versus confidence. What helps me to stay the course of walking that line is realizing that intention matters.
Mm.
And when it comes to intent, it's an abstract um, phenomenon. It's like I could express to you my intent, but ultimately, like, hopefully, what I express to you will, you know will come to be. But ultimately, you wouldn't know based on what I'm thinking and processing internally,
Mm.
what my next move would be.
Mhm.
But from a self accountability standpoint, and I have to be aware of what my intent is, and so that when I experience the outcome of my actions, I'll have an awareness of why I am experiencing this particular outcome.
Mm.
And I think sometimes, like, I like to use nature as um, a good analogy, or a to use nature analogies.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely. Me
when
too.
when I exercise and I'm walking on a trail, like recently when it was raining, there were a lot of slugs that were crossing the path that I was on, and they moved very slow while I'm moving very fast. And there were times when I encountered them, and I could have stepped on it because it was in my way, but I chose to just slow down a little bit and move around it. because I realized if I were to step on it, there would be an intent for that action. And for me personally, if I were to experience the reflection of my intent regarding killing something or harming something, then I think I would be I would be sacrificing in terms of my humility and my confidence to want to do better for myself. And also, I think I would, if I'm talking to someone and telling them guidance on how they could be bettering themselves, I think internally I would be realizing it would be kind of a facade, or it would just be double talk.
Mm, mm,
So I try to be aware of intent in terms of my decision making, and in terms of engaging with the outer world, which could be in the form of people or just when I'm by myself and presented with temptation to do things that I'm aware is of detriment to me.
mm. Yeah, I love that. I mean, maybe a couple things. One I wanted to add around. I talked about being a teacher and a dad, but I think also my being with my partner for almost 25 years. I would say that my partner Em, she's one of my greatest teachers, and it's been incredible, kind of like us growing together, both as individuals, but also as a couple too. And then, and I appreciate the piece you were talking about intent because, one of my homies a long time ago said, basically put it in my ear and it never left this like, understanding intention versus impact. And,
Hmm.
it's like even when we have really good intent, that sometimes the impact that, we have like isn't, what we aimed for, or it could be like we have really good intentions, but then the impact is negative. And that, a lot of pieces around growth have to do with like us being able to, be able to spot that. And like, even if we had good intentions, be accountable if our impact wasn't, great. Um, and so when you're kind of talking about, the slugs, I was thinking like I was like, yeah, that's super real. And I was like, and also I'm like, what does it mean if like you didn't, like I just wasn't paying attention, I accidentally stepped on the slug, like as far as the metaphor, right?
Hmm.
In life, and how can we grow from those moments
Hmm.
when we make mistakes and acknowledge our mistakes and learn from our mistakes.
Hmm.
But I love the nature metaphors.
Yeah, I think for me personally, my mind processes symbolism more intuitively than the written language, and I
Mm,
just think like symbolism in terms of just like imageries and things of that nature.
mm.
And
Yep.
I think it's like, the written language is a human construct, and I do think there is purpose and resource for it. But like if we're in a tribal community or we're out in the wild, like there's no written guides on how to deal with a predator that's crossing your path. It's all instinct and intuition at that point.
100%.
Yeah. Um, so I want to ask. So it seems like it seems like you're very appreciative of the opportunity to be a husband and a father, which seems like you have you're experiencing supportiveness and benefit to that. So, what can you tell me about your relationship with your wife, M?
Well, I think so. We met at UC Santa Cruz when I was a freshman. She was a sophomore, and so we were like what, uh, 17 and 18 or something like
Hmm.
that, or yeah, or both 18 or something like that. But yeah, it's a trip that was more than half of a lifetime ago. Um, um, so yeah, I mean, it's like my mind doesn't really know where to go first, but I think It's just been incredible to well, maybe the first thing I'll say is that, I think one thing that was really powerful about, us becoming a couple was we were friends first. And I think that, in my mind is kind of something that will set up, if you want to be a monogamous, couple with two people, right? A really kind of good way to be set up for success is to have a very, very deep friendship with that person. And then also we like, all had we're part of the same like, pretty solid friend group. And so,
Mhm.
I think, for us to have a lot of community around us that really loves and supports, us as individuals, but also as a couple. And, like, we'll like babysit our kids so that we can like go to a date night, like things like that. Like, um, I say all this like because I think there's a lot of kind of like Disneyland, stories about romance and like that aren't really real, because Em and I have, had tons of fights and disagreements, and it's not always pretty. And, I think, what I've learned about growth in our relationship and in love is that, really it's about, like I just feel incredibly fortunate that I found somebody that I like don't ever want to give up on and have made this leap of faith, that she doesn't, that she won't ever want to give up on me, and that will, communicate. And I think that's the biggest thing is like when things get tough, we sit down, we talk, and we don't like quit on each other. We like sit and talk until we figure it out.
Mhm.
That can take a lot of energy and time, but I would say it's been incredibly worth it, you know, by a billion, um, by a billion points. So, um, yeah.
I think what I can relate to in terms of how you describe your relationship with your wife is I tend to be naturally attracted to people who reflect me as an individual regarding when I say reflect me, I mean my internal self and the the my awareness of myself. So
Mm,
um I am a honest, transparent, disciplined, professional, health conscious individual.
mm,
And so, be it a personal relationship or people who I call friends, um, I tend to be attracted to people who conduct themselves in such a similar way, and and that consistency of bonding with these people who tend to reflect me has still remained to this day. So, with that being said, how does M reflect you?
mm. That's a great question, and I love your like what you just shared. I think what's interesting. So I really what you said resonates because some of what I'll do with students,
Mhm.
is I will have them kind of think about and identify what are their core values, right? That might be community, integrity, um, curiosity, right? These kinds of things.
Mhm.
Um, but it's like once the folks like kind of identify, their what that is. It's like Em and I are like actually really different, experiences and identities in so many different ways, and like when it comes to the different forms of intelligence, for example, right? She's like really strong where I struggle, and vice versa sometimes, right? And so there's actually those are the ways that we actually it's like, we don't necessarily reflect each other, but we like complement each other. And
Mhm.
so, one big kind of symbol philosophy in my life that's meant a lot to me, I think, especially as like a mixed race, and mixed heritage person on a lot of different levels,
Mhm.
is yin yang. I'm also a Gemini. And so there's
Mhm.
like the duality piece is like really important to me. And so I see a lot of yin yang in Em and I.
Mm.
And but I also, to the first point, feel like we have really similar core values:
Mhm.
family, community, integrity, justice. Um, humor, being able to laugh, yeah, compassion, um, and yeah, and so I would say those are the things we're really reflecting, each other, and and I and when it comes to like you were saying, I feel um, attracted, pulled towards human beings that have the same core values as me, and like want to
Mhm.
be in space and community with those folks.
Yes, and that the way you phrased it, core values. That's I would say when I say reflections, I would say that would also be what I was referring to. It's just a
Mm,
interchangeable
sure.
terms. Yeah, for
Yep.
sure.
Yep.
um, and then what I want to ask you about is so. Oh, I was unaware that you went to UC Santa Cruz because I read in your bio that you also had went to San Francisco State. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I went to undergrad. I did a bachelor's in American Studies and a minor in education at Santa Cruz, and then did a master's in Asian American Studies at SF State.
okay. And then so going back to your childhood,
Mm.
um, what what inspired you to become a teacher?
Well, it's funny, because we went to high school together. Is I never thought I would become a teacher during
Mm-hmm.
during that time. Not the vast majority of my teachers in K through 12 were really seemed really unhappy. And it makes sense, right? Because it's like, West Contra Costa Unified, Richmond Unified was, you know, really under-resourced. I
Mm-hmm.
remember 4th grade, when the district, like, went bankrupt and, like, had to get bailed out by the state, right? And so, you have a lot of teachers that are really overwhelmed, and really, struggling and under-resourced and didn't have everything they needed to be successful, and that can be incredibly frustrating, debilitating, all those things. But then also the other piece too is like, the vast majority of my teachers were like middle class white women, right? And so I didn't see a lot of, men of color, um, uh, educators. I think that, the vast majority of, like men of color, kind of mentors that I had growing up, and I imagine this might be similar for you, were like coaches in sports. And so I think it wasn't until actually I went to SF State, when I was doing my master's, and I was, I had come from the nonprofit world, and so I was like thinking, I was gonna probably head in the direction of being like a social worker or case manager, that kind of thing. But and then I met, one of my mentors, Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, is a really really dope TED talk, that where he talks about Tupac Shakur, um, but he was kind of one of the first, men of color that, he was like talking about Tupac in his teaching. He was a former athlete. He was also multiracial like me too. And
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, it's we talk about reflection, right? It was the I was like I didn't know that, you know this could exist, and so it like put the um it helped my growth in, me being able to see, um, not somebody who's like exactly the same as me, but enough to the point where I could be like, maybe I could do this. Because
Mm-hmm.
he also exuded a lot of passion about teaching, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing it as something that was, transformational, liberation inspired. Um, and so that was, he played a huge role in my jumping in that direction. But then on
Mm-hmm.
top of that, he also, um, he, you know, explicitly, implicitly, like, let me know that he saw something in me, and that
Mm-hmm.
he believed in me, and that he thought that, there was something in me that, that there was potential and that I could be a great educator someday. And so, I hadn't really had in academics somebody really kind of come at me that way. I was like kind of like a B student, generally, and but no one was ever like, "Oh, you're great at this," or "You could be great." Like, and he was kind of one of the first people that ever really like made me feel that way.
That's interesting because it seems you were going a path or a different direction that was of different from going the path of being a teacher. Then you experienced an unexpected circumstance in the form of your mentor, which he presented his perspective of who you are and the potentials that you could achieve as a teacher. And from that point it seemed like his expressions to you were relatable to you on an internal level,
Mhm.
which then inspired you to engage in a unknown unexpected situation, which would be teaching. Is that a accurate assessment?
100%. And and the thing too is like, I was like a case manager who, um I would like go into schools and meet with, I had a caseload of, particular students who are all like, first in their families to go to college, that kind of thing, and supporting them. They also, like in the organization I worked with, it like plugged them into having jobs, and, a savings account for college and that kind of stuff. But I also, I realized with a lot of their challenges that, um, a lot of their challenges were like in the classroom itself. And so, I think like it also was kind of this perfect timing of meeting him and like me being like, there's a particular way where like if I'm actually in the classroom itself, uh,
Hmm.
I can potentially, provide support that I can't if I'm, a social worker on the outside. Um,
Hmm.
Particularly as it pertains to academics and being successful in that to gain access to higher education.
Hmm. And one thing that helps me to assess if um, I it would be a benefit for me to continue on engaging in an experience is how enjoyable is me engaging in the experience.
Mm.
That could be exercise, working at a particular job, even a relationship. So, what I want to ask you is, how are you enjoying being a professor?
Um, I love it. It's incredibly difficult. And yeah, it's like, hard for me to sleep most nights just because I'm always thinking about, this is kind of the other side of, how can I be better? How can I be better? Right. Is like, my battling perfectionism.
Hmm.
So, I have like, a lot of challenges with like just being able to rest even when I have a break.
Hmm.
And I was thinking like, oh, I got to do this thing, do this thing. But um, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Can you say the question one more time? My
Yeah,
apologies.
yeah. The question is, how are you enjoying being a professor?
I feel incredibly honored, incredibly privileged to be in the spot that I'm in. Um, it's really, really difficult, particularly at the moment, to get a full time faculty position at a community college.
Hmm.
Because a lot of what happens is folks will get into these positions and then they never leave. Because generally, like teaching high school, I would argue is really, really unsustainable, particularly right
Mm.
now. The Department of Education is being destroyed. I mean, teachers, already for as long as we've been alive, have not been paid what they need, to be successful.
Hmm.
There's like folks with multiple master's degrees that are making you know um, $40,000 a year in
Hmm.
California, right? And then it's like um, you're like in tons of student loan debt and all these different things. So it's just like really unsustainable. It's in a really rough place for so many people. And um, so I want to shout out everybody that is in the profession of teaching, particularly public schools, just because of how just the professional disrespect that happens there. And I would argue any profession deserves respect. I don't care what somebody is doing, right?
Hmm.
But well, I think particularly when it comes to labor that is caretaking, right? I would argue that in our society, whether consciously or not, people tend to frame caretaking as like feminine work, and
Mhm.
because of sexism, um, that then it's deemed less worthy of praise, of compensation, all these things.
Mhm.
Um, being at Diablo Valley College now, and this is my first full year there. I was at Kenyatta College in Redwood City last year,
Mhm.
and loved it. But I was in the car like 3 hours a day just to get to campus, and so being in the car for 12 to 15 hours a week was not the business. So I'm very, very glad to be about 25 minutes away now from DVC. Um, and it's Contra Costa County, like where we grew up. It's slightly different, right, than West County, um, but I definitely feel like I can, in the class, I can speak to my experiences growing up in Richmond and El Cerrito, and a lot of things will land, with students there. I Yeah, I think I feel really, really fortunate on that end, and then also I feel really honored, and it's incredibly difficult in this particular period in time to teach ethnic studies because you have, a litany of, um, students that are tapping into podcasts that aren't thoughtful like this one that you host, right? That are promoting white supremacy, that are promoting misogyny and sexism and male domination of women, hatred of queer folks, hatred of poor people, hatred of immigrants. Even if some of the podcast hosts are some of those things themselves, still
Mhm.
promoting hatred,
Mhm.
right? And I think the opposite of growth is death and destruction.
Mhm.
And so promoting that stuff, whether they are able to articulate that or not, and so it can be really challenging. And it's not the majority by far, right? It's usually a small minority, but there will be folks that come in and think that they you know have never taken an ethnic studies course, right? I have a master's degree in it, right? And they think that it's like a waste of time, or it's like that I'm doing some sort of indoctrination or brainwashing, because I'm talking about history from the perspective of Black, Indigenous, and people of color,
Mhm.
and talking about white privilege, male privilege, heterosexual privilege, able-bodied privilege, right? And doing everything in my power via academic research to humanize people who have historically or presently being dehumanized.
Mhm.
And so I think, yeah, it's really, it's such an honor to be able to do that and to be
Mhm.
in this position.
Mhm.
And also it's really, really hard, because of those things I named, but also, ethnic studies recently became a requirement to graduate. And
Mhm.
so, it used to be, right, when I was like taking ethnic studies courses in undergrad, for example, it was opt-in, right? The only people in there were people that really wanted to be in there and learn about these things. And
Yeah.
now you'll have students who, I just got to, pass this class so I can get my prerequisites and get out of here and transfer. Right?
Mhm.
And so, um, it can be really challenging to, try to create a really like thoughtful space when you have some folks that really like maybe not only don't want to be there, right, but also already have like kind of hateful ideas about what they think I'm even going to talk about before
Mhm.
I even said a word. Um, so that's my growth point right now, is getting better and better at figuring out how to, particularly create safe spaces in those classrooms
Mhm.
for students of color, uh,
Mhm.
and um, and doing so thoughtfully to make sure that you know I think especially white students that are um, really struggling with, um, the word that comes to mind is fragility, uh,
Mhm.
that in helping them build empathy,
Mm,
um, in growing that. And so trying to do so many things simultaneously, all right, especially while raising children, all right, and trying to be a good husband, trying to be a good friend to all the folks in my community, trying to be a good son, all right, it can be a lot. But um, uh, the do you have you ever listened to All the Smoke, the sports podcast with Steven Jackson and Matt Barnes?
yeah.
Yeah, he was like, I remember Steven Jackson saying like, pressure is a privilege. All right, so
Mm,
I try to operate holding on to that.
okay. Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, because pressure seems to be existing whether you avoid it or not. So it's
Mm,
just a matter of how do you endure the pressure, and how do you engage and interact with the pressure with the hope to have some sense of relatability to what you're experiencing at present,
mhm.
from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
But in terms, so for people who are unaware and unaware of what ethnic studies is,
Mm.
how would you summarize what the ethnic studies is?
Yeah, so ethnic studies, was born here in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
Um, in 1968, there was a group of students, community organizers, professors, predominantly of color, who came together and essentially said, you know, we need to have a College of Ethnic Studies where we can learn about the histories of people of color,
Hmm.
because you know essentially all of our standardized curriculum and what we learn about U.S. history or European history is all like Eurocentric, and we're learning about like the founding fathers, but we're not learning about say history from the perspective of indigenous people and Native Americans, and like what the founding fathers did to indigenous people, and those, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so it was the longest student strike in U.S. history, and a lot of it actually begins at Merritt College, a community college in Oakland, with the Black Student Union there.
Hmm.
And they're folks, they're tied to it gets to SF State where it really really blows up, and there's like police with batons and they're sticking dogs on students, and who are not attending classes, and on strike, and the professors are on strike, and then it goes over to UC Berkeley, and so but they end up winning, get their demands, and San Francisco State is the first ever College of Ethnic Studies in the United States. And so I would say that ethnic studies is what is called an interdisciplinary academic subject, meaning that you have history, psychology, sociology, math, science, all these different things kind of coming together, but the focus being centering the perspectives of marginalized people, uh,
Hmm.
and particularly, starting with Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, but also thinking about how to essentially identify, and ultimately end white supremacist ideology. And that's not to say that white people are evil, or um, that being a white person is bad. It's about the ideology, this
Hmm.
idea that white people are more valuable or more beautiful or more intelligent or of more value, like these kinds of things. And so eliminating that idea.
Okay, I appreciate the elaboration. And for you had mentioned earlier that I think you had said you encountered some commentary or concern from, I think, students that or others other than yourself, that this this study can be classified as a way to indoctrinate people.
Mhm,
So for um, students who are going to be eventually attending a junior college, and if required to take ethnic studies, what um, what comfort and um, what comfort can you provide them that such a topic or concept isn't intended to indoctrinate?
Hmm, it's a good question. Well, the entire premise behind ethnic studies is anti-oppression, right? And so indoctrination, right, specifically is oppression. Right? Indoctrination is trying to take away somebody's agency or their freedom and tell them what to think. Right? Ethnic studies is really rooted in and based around love and humanization and gaining tools and skills to be able to think critically and to be able to identify and resist oppression and injustice.
Hmm.
And so, it's really ironic, right, when something born out of trying to resist injustice, right, gets labeled, um, but particularly by those who have benefited, from legacies of injustice
Hmm.
as something that is unjust. And I think that's like, a lot of what I would argue we're seeing today is, a war over ideas, right? Like who is going to have the kind of dominant narrative, or most, listened to story about, um, like what has value, right? And ethnic studies, at least in my experience and perspective, is really about using academic research, empirical evidence to highlight where there are problems so that
Yeah.
we can fix social problems. Um, and, I think one of the ways that, that privilege operates, whether it's white privilege, male privilege, straight privilege, being in the US privilege, is that, when we have it, and I have lots of privilege, right? Um, I think that we can unconsciously become entitled to feeling comfortable. And then when we, and like we were talking about, right, like you can't grow without discomfort.
Hmm.
That if and when I feel, say, entitled to like um, being listened to, right, in my opinions, because I'm like light skinned or I'm able bodied or I'm a man, and then somebody like is like, yo, like you're talking a lot. Right, like, that might make me deeply uncomfortable because of, like, maybe I've never been challenged in that way in my entire life, right? And so I think, like, if somebody thinks that, um, their discomfort equals, some sort of, like, indoctrination or injustice, you know, a lot of what I'll do is, I'll be like, "You need to read, these things we're looking at,"
Hmm.
because if you for example, see what, indigenous people have encountered in this country, what black folks have encountered in this country, what like, the Chinese in the 1800s were encountering in this country. Like, I bet you wouldn't feel like what is happening right now, like your discomfort is all that serious.
Hmm.
And I don't mean to downplay, anybody's, discomfort on any level. But I think at the end of the day, 16 weeks learning about um, the history of the United States through the lenses of people of color is not going to kill anybody. Um,
and
straight up.
I can imagine just based on what you said of the commentary about people being concerned about the indoctrination, um, possibly resulting in um, certain students forming certain opinions or um, not being in support of what is being taught during the class.
Mm.
So, how open and flexible are you to people who aren't relating to what is being taught um, in their growth and expressionism?
Well, the thing, I mean, where I always will draw the line is if, um, if, somebody, um, is, and it's never easy, right? It can be challenging to, kind of find that discernment. But, ultimately, I always do my absolute best to, always, draw the line at anybody, being, um, blatantly, um, racist, sexist, homophobic, and ultimately, like, not seeing the humanity,
Hmm.
in any kind of oppressed, um, identity.
Hmm.
And I, because, that's quite literally the point of ethnic studies. And if I'm going to, kind of represent, the legacy of, this particular, field of study,
Hmm.
um, and I also am going to do everything in my power to make sure that, my currently and or historically marginalized students are safe, right? That, I have to have really kind of tight guidelines around those kinds of things.
Yes, yes, I
Um,
can. Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying, and um, I think too, like when I think of indoctrination, it seems that indoctrination stems from an authoritarian mentality. So if you see someone other as lesser than yourself or as your subordinate,
mhm,
then their opinions or their expressionisms um, doesn't matter to you. But I think it seems if you are having a willingness and an open mindedness to at least hear someone without, relating to what they're saying, I think that's when uh, the idea that a study being taught or professed wouldn't be considered indoctrination.
mhm.
So that's my perspective on it as well.
Thanks for sharing.
So I read I was reading your bio, and what stuck out to me was something that I was reading about, and that was the Alone tribe here in the Bay Area. I found, well, I didn't find a book, but there used to be a Native American gift store on Solano Avenue called the
Gathering tribes.
Gathering Tribes.
Yeah, the owner is one of my mom's best friends.
Wow, Penny,
Yeah. Hmm.
Penny Opal Plant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And she told me, she suggested that I read this book. I think it was called The Alone Way.
Yeah. I have that book.
Yeah, it was very insightful.
Mm.
So for those who are unaware of this book, also there was a comment that came in, so I definitely want to shout out them. It's one of our high school alumni and friends, Mr. Coach Kenny
What's up,
Khan.
man?
He said, "Go Gauchos."
Yeah.
I concur that, Kenny. Thank you for tuning in. And if you have any, if other people are listening, if you have any comments or questions, please do um, post them, and we will try to address them. I appreciate everybody tuning in. What I wanted to touch on in one of the chapters of the book is a term that I was unaware of, and it's called a triblet. When I think of tribes, um, it seems by definition a triblet is a different. It seems like it's a subculture of a tribe, and I wrote down the definition of what a triblet is. It says, what does it say? A triblet by definition is a tribe having few members, especially one that is a component of a larger tribal organization. Um, are you familiar with this term, triblet?
I haven't heard this before.
Okay. So I think, as I recall in the book, in contrast to like the bigger tribes like the Seminoles and the Cherokee tribes, they were like a larger organization,
Mm,
and I guess they would inhabit a large expanse of area in certain states. Where, in contrast with the Alone, apparently they were like small groups, and they would inhabit the Bay Area, but they would inhabit. I want to use modern times. Certain they would each small group would inhabit um, small areas within sometimes shorter distances from one another, but or a little bit further distances from one another, but they were all interconnected
mm,
and they would all interact with one another. So let's say, for an example, if your tribelet was inhabiting Berkeley, my Berkeley, California, and my tribelet was inhabiting Oakland, California, we would still be the same tribe. It's just that we were like just spread out,
yeah.
and we still like identified as being the I want to use a metaphor. We were still the California Golden Bears football team, but we weren't all in the city of Berkeley,
Mm,
which I thought was pretty interesting. And I think the logic behind tribelets was it was a matter of resource, and also the constant change of the Bay Area climate
mm,
resulted in migrations from areas where certain times of the year it was cold. Um, they would migrate and have trade and exchanges with their their fellow tribesmen, but they were still they were still considered each other a tribe as a whole, which was very interesting to me. So I just wanted to mention that and see if you had any insight regarding the term tribelet.
mm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that term. Um, I think, I mean, where my mind goes is like thinking. I mean, especially since we're on a lonely lands. Um, yeah, I was thinking about um, like the Bay Area, and
Hmm.
especially like I feel like I'm so like many of us, I'm so proud to be from the Bay Area.
Hmm.
Feel like really like grateful to have grown up here. And like um as like I was thinking like as like a hip hop fan, like thinking about how different like when we were growing up, like rap from Vallejo sounded different than it did in like Richmond or Oakland or San Francisco.
Hmm.
And but it was all Bay Area rap, right?
Right.
Or like when I think about Wisconsin Crossing Unified Schools, and it's like Pinole Valley High, there's El Cerrito, there's De Anza, there's Richmond, there's Kennedy, right? And how it was like all these kind of different, kind of energies and communities there, but they were all Wisconsin Crossing Unified.
Hmm.
Um, and so it kind of, I don't know, it makes sense, right? That like indigenous people would kind of recognize different patterns within the weather and think about how do we collectively kind of take care of ourselves and each other while also staying connected.
Hmm.
I think that's a really really cool concept. And I so Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. it's played a big role in my life. And actually, I returned to temple service at Berkeley Buddhist Temple just this past Sunday and brought my family and hadn't been in a long time. It was really nice to kind of return because I went there from sixth grade to 12th grade.
Hmm.
I played basketball for the church as well, and but I say that because in Buddhism there's so much kind of philosophy around interdependence and interconnectedness and recognizing that, and then where my mind goes is thinking about the United States and the Trump administration, and us becoming more and more isolated because of our foreign policy and blatant disrespect of kind of anybody outside of the United States. um, the writer Arundhati Roy says, the American way of life is not sustainable because it doesn't acknowledge there's a world beyond America,
Mm.
right? And so I think that we're in this moment of being in a lot of trouble because we're as a our government is isolating the United States from having positive relationships from other nations because we're all citizens of this earth, all right? And so forgetting about that interconnectedness, right, I think is deeply dangerous, uh,
Mm.
and deeply harmful.
Yeah, I agree. I like to um, be mindful of the holistic nature of of life in general, and how there is a subtle interconnecting tether that connects us all.
Yeah.
And I think what separates or distances individuals from this awareness is ego
Yeah.
and
100%.
uh, expectation of how the external world should be performing versus how it is performing or uh, producing or progressing. It's up to me to be aware of how the external world operates,
Mhm.
and be inspired and guided by the indications naturally that the the external world is presenting to me. But
Mhm.
ultimately, it's my choice to adopt what is being taught to me
Mhm.
from some spiritual force, which apparent brought me here.
Mhm.
So uh let's see what else I want to ask you. Let's see. Hmm. Okay, so I'm multi-ethnic as well. I'm a lot of stuff over generations:
Mhm.
Native American, African American, Creole, um, Mexican, Irish. Learning about, just recently discovered that I'm Irish. Like my one of my great 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 grandmothers was a indentured servant in Virginia,
Mhm.
and she came from Ireland.
Mhm.
And somehow, some way, they she had a relationship, or some of her descendants had a relationship with an African American. How that circumstance happened, I don't know, but I do know that I do have cousins, or I had a cousin who has red hair, freckles on his face. And I recall you saying that you're also multi-ethnic, and I think that's a beautiful thing, because it all, to me, it demonstrates a willingness to not have prejudice um, towards an individual, in terms of being open to having a relationship with someone who appreciates and loves you and sees you who as you are, versus uh, putting conditions in their mind about how you should be, right? So I wanted to ask you, in terms of your parents, how did they or like yeah, how did your parents meet each other? And
They met through mutual friends, and I think they like lived in some for a summer. They lived in the same house that they like
mhm,
went to from the mutual friends. And I think the rest was history from there.
Hmm.
But um, I think to your, to kind of some of what you're saying, like I think it is, really beautiful when, folks who are, told that they are different, right? Because, race is a social construct. It's not a, like a biological, fact that if you look this way, you'll be this, you'll be smarter, or you'll be this, right? But like, you know, it's been so embedded in the fabric of US society and in the world, right? That, the way that people look can have very real determinants in in their life, whether that's being treated with respect, or being assumed to be smart, or like or the opposite of that, right? And it can but I say all that just because I think when it comes to multiracial relationships, right, I think that there can be a lot of space for beauty, growth, and those kinds of things. And also, I think, there are many, many, instances of, folks who are, in interracial relationships where there's a lot of like weird stuff going on, right? And like folks, maybe have some like internalized, um, like pain that maybe like maybe I'll feel validated or better if I'm with this person because, they're a different race. Or like there's like weird kind of fetishization that happens, like especially with like women of color being sexualized, hypersexualized. I mean, it looks different for different groups of women of color, but yes, I mean, all of that's to say it's really complicated, right? As you um but I do deeply, I feel very, very fortunate that my parents you know love each other deeply, have are still together, right? There's a lot of people. The thing I would say, the vast majority of people I know, that are our age, their parents aren't together. Um, more than 50%, I would say. And so I feel very fortunate that it's like I had that model, for example. Because I think it's helped me a lot in my relationship and my marriage, and and I know that the two, my wife and I being together has been monumentally helpful for my children also.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'm glad that your parents are still together, and I'm glad that you have a long lasting relationship with your wife. I hope it will be a lifelong experience for you.
Thank you.
Um, and I want to touch on another section of your bio that was interesting to me. It says that at some point you engaged in being a film narrator. Is that what it was saying?
Yeah, that was very short lived, but that was shout out to my homie John Nell, when he was working with Grit Media, because I love sports, especially basketball. And there were a few different documentaries on kind of up and coming players that were, coming out of college trying to go into the NBA, and I got to narrate some of those, and that was really fun. I loved that because it's like, oh, my baby girl is yelling for me. Hang on, babe. I'll be out in a little bit. um, but like if you watch like the I'm trying to remember what they're called, the HBO, like boxing matches, and they'll like have the things building up to the fight, and like the person narrating it is like Liev Schreiber, or I forgot, Liam Neeson, I think. But I remember like loving those and be like, it would be so cool to do that. But it was only like a few of them. I didn't do a ton, but it was something that like I really enjoyed doing.
Wow, that's amazing. I think you're the first person that I know who was cast to be a narrator for a film, and I'm glad you enjoyed that experience as well.
Yeah.
That's cool, very insightful, and hopefully, if you enjoyed that process, you'll attract more opportunities to do so.
Yeah.
Um, for sure. And then, so I know we're getting close to the end. So we're going to move on to the next section. It's called the multiple intelligence theory.
Mm.
So, for those who are unaware of what the multiple intelligence theory is, when it comes to intellect, there's two popular theories. One is more popular than the other. The more popular theory suggests that we as individuals have three forms of intellect, and that and which would be a I'm sorry, it would be naturalistic, scientific, uh, mathematical slash logical, as well as linguistic slash writing capabilities. And since this theory has been adopted by academic institutions, we tend to be tested on these intellects. And depending on how well we perform in our testing, such as a SAT exam in high school, we are then eligible to proceed on to the collegiate level. However, alternatively, there is another theory that suggests that we as individuals, in addition to the three intellects mentioned, have six additional intellects, and those would be musical as existential slash spiritual, interpersonal slash people smart, bodily kinesthetic slash body smart, intrapersonal slash self smart, and spatial. Which spatial intelligence is the ability to interact and engage with physical objects outside of ourselves. And the reason why I present this theory is so that um, listeners and viewers who may be unaware of this theory can be inspired to grow these intellects through practice and repetition. And it seems that when it comes to intellect, they can grow similar to how a basketball player practices shooting the ball in hopes that they make it in the net. With more practice and repetition, that ability can become enhanced.
Mm.
So, what I want to ask you, Colin, is of the nine multiple intelligences, which one or more do you sense you have high degrees in?
Well, like I was telling you before we started, I really appreciate this frame. This is something I bring to, my students, because, when I ask them to kind of, talk about, the first maybe like top three they feel the strongest in, and then the three that maybe they like want to have, they have room for growth in, right? And a lot of why I do that is because, like you were mentioning, there's a lot of ways I would argue our society, schools in particular, will make a hierarchy of these, right? Reality is all of these forms of intelligence are powerful, beautiful, valuable, right? But in a capitalist society, essentially what's making the most money is generally going to be put on top, right? And so, I say that in the beginning of classes because I tell students, explicitly that like I want to, I tell them that I want to aim to honor every form of intelligence that is in the room. Um, but yeah, so yeah, thank you for bringing this forward. I appreciate that. Um,
Mm,
but I think I mean, what comes to mind first and foremost, particularly as a teacher, with those like humanities and social sciences, is linguistic,
mhm,
and but also interpersonal.
mhm,
Being a teacher, being able to kind of like be in relation with people is so important, right? Like, I think every person I've ever known has had at some point, like particularly like K through 12 schooling, has had a teacher who you could tell like didn't like children, didn't like young people. And it's like, what the hell are you doing? Like being a teacher if you don't know how to build relationships with young people. And so, I think when it comes to being a teacher, I think linguistic, right, being able to express myself and be clear, right? Like whether, around my expectations in like and in giving instructions and teaching my students in ways that they can understand, and it's not like I'm not making it difficult for them like to intake and think about and question the information in front of them. All right, and a lot of that too is like interpersonally, like as I'm scanning the room, for example, like can I see someone like really checked out or like looking like they're in a bad mood or like they're struggling or or they're confused, right? That I can, okay, now we're going to do a turn and talk. Here's a question. And then, and then everybody turns and talks to a neighbor. I'll go over to that student, and just be like, hey, everything okay? I just want to check in, just make sure you're doing all right. You got any questions, anything I can support you with? Right. And so I think, those are, I think those two in tandem, my working really hard to build those. And also, I think um, I'm like, I think the pandemic definitely changed this. Becoming a dad definitely changed this. But before, most of my life, I've been like really extroverted and
Mhm.
gotten a lot of energy from being around people, and I love talking with people, right? Anybody that has a podcast, I think is like, enjoys dialogue and discussion. And so, but I think, yeah, those come into play for me. And then, but also the intrapersonal one too. Right? When I think about a teacher, right, because you
Mhm.
also have to be constantly reflecting, in the inside, and knowing who you are, right, and like knowing, for example, like what are things that students do that get under my skin, and like, because I never want to be thrown off my game. I never want to be in a place where I'm not coming from a place of my heart, and a place of love and care.
Mhm.
But I can tell that, when I'm really struggling, I'm at capacity that sometimes it can be difficult, right, to come from that really good, intentional, caring space, right? And so I think when it comes to teaching, for me personally, what I've worked really hard, and I feel like are some of my strengths, are the linguistic, interpersonal, and interpersonal. Um, yeah, yeah. And then it's interesting too because I think about then, going back to where a lot of where we started, right? When it comes to my wife, I feel like she's really, really powerful in a lot of these other areas that, I really still have a lot of room for growth in. Or like a lot of my closest friends, like really, you know, um, teach me, help me grow, in, a lot of these other ones where it's like my brother's a musician, right? The musical piece. My mother is like, a gardener, with a naturalist piece.
Mm.
Um, M is an artist, so she's a designer, so she's really amazing around the spatial and the logical, mathematical. Um, and I'm just thinking about one of my friends I had coffee with today, who's like brilliant around the existential, and is a philosopher in so many ways. But but yeah, I love this frame, and I love these questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you enjoy it. And I think what I learned from you as someone who is a professor is, um, when you're in the classroom, you have a choice to engage and interact with individuals. And it seems like when the result of an initiation is a reflection, or some people also would call it an echo. So
Mm,
as you're talking or lecturing to these individuals, you're then experiencing the reactions, which can be receptive, or it can be they can be in a place of self distraction or distracted or disengaged. But ultimately, it seems like these behaviors by these individuals are uh, are they are the reflections of your initiation as a teacher.
mm,
And so from that point, uh, this may seem like it is let's say the individuals who are disengaged, it may seem like it is a detrimental occurrence, but the reality is that it is happening at present. So at that point, you know, there it seems like the experience needs to be addressed by you as a teacher.
mm.
And if you choose to engage in the reflection of your initial initiation, I think that can even result in growth for you as a teacher as well,
Yeah,
which apparently seemingly it has, because you are then formulating new methods and strategies to inspire the students to become more aware of what you're intending to present to them as a teacher, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that a lot.
Hmm. Uh, Kenny's commenting like crazy. He say, and I appreciate the comments, Kenny. Programs of people.
Kenny, Kenny, I emailed your goddaughter. She was trying to get in my class. Banana slugs, absolutely.
Yeah, he said another one. He says, um, "Shout out to all my mixed
Hey.
folks,
Yes.
beautifully blended." Yeah, you funny, Kenny. Okay, so yeah, yeah, definitely. Your shared experiences with your intellect and how you develop them uh, is a resource to me for sure, especially with the interpersonal um, advice and elaboration. So I thank you for that.
Thank
That was good. Okay, we're about to wrap up. We're gonna go to the end. Thank for everybody for tuning in. This is my most favorite part of this podcast. It's called the interpreting expression section. So um, in life, I encounter quotes or questions that ultimately are expressions. And certain quotes and questions are relatable to myself, which I use as a resource to inspire me to, um, to continue my journey of growth through application of the quote based on how relative it is to me at present. And I like to present these expressions on the podcast in hopes that these expressions will also be relatable to listeners. And and then also I like to share my interpretation of a quote or a question, which is unique in itself for each person and individual based on their perspective. And so today's interpreting expressions quote is: uncertainty is a sign that you are in alignment. And so myself and the featured guest will share our interpretation of the quote, and hopefully our expressions will be relatable not only to ourselves but also of resource to the people who are tuned into the show. So Colin, how would you interpret the quote, and how relatable is it to yourself?
you. It is very relatable. Um, I think that um, something that I will try to do is when I feel really certain about something, I'll try to catch myself and think about, you mentioned earlier like ego and what role that might be playing. Um, um, but it's like I think there are some things that I am absolutely certain of, and that's like
Hmm.
loving my family, that that I believe in justice. I believe that um, that no human being should be degraded, or
Hmm.
like anybody should um, prosper at the expense of other people's unearned suffering.
Hmm.
Those kinds of things. But when I think about uncertainty, a sign you're in alignment. Um, the way I think about alignment is being in accord. Your mind and your heart being married,
Hmm.
and not being divorced. And I think there's because to me that's integrity, right? And so the uncertainty piece I think is around like staying curious, um, uh, not making assumptions, being able to like become comfortable in discomfort, right? Because a lot of uncertainty can be really uncomfortable for so many people, myself included at times. And so my daughter is crying near the door. Um, but when it comes to the theme of this pod, right? I think uncertainty and being able to wrestle with like not knowing for sure is actually a really powerful strength when utilized well. Um, because certainty in my mind in a lot of ways can be really linked to rigidity and being like really closed and stuck. And so, one of my heroes growing up was Bruce Lee, right?
Hmm.
He talks about water and water's power around being adaptable. Sorry, can you hear my daughter? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I can hear it a little bit.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Um, but that is, yeah, I think, well, yeah, so Bruce Lee talked about water, and it being able to, you put it in the cup, it becomes the cup. If it can crash, it can flow, it can like you know uh, destroy cities, but it can also be completely still and completely gentle, right? And so I think like the uncertainty piece and being able to be comfortable in discomfort is that adaptability and being able to, yeah, not become rigid, not become stagnant, and to continue to grow.
Hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I can relate to what you're saying because it seems like, man, the external world is like ever changing, and so it's like, yeah, I hope to be, I hope to be in alignment overall with the flow of life, and I I am, be honest with you, I'm uncertain if certainty is the key to conduct myself at present. I am able to be intuitively aware of what I sense is morally correct at present, but I think sometimes the temptation of being certain about outcomes that have yet to come to the horizon and occur is when, um, my life can then become conflicted and be in turmoil, right? So it's like, man, it's a challenging thing for sure. And I think what I want to read, I got a quote. It says, um, "To live in alignment through the present will always be uncertain because you never have been in this moment before." And it's like, that's a very subtle, to just imagine what this quote is referring to when it comes to the present. It is some The present moment is new,
Mm,
and but it's very subtle to conceptualize and think about. And the question is do I need to be certain about the present, or do I take life, address life as it comes to me or flows to me? And how do I engage with this flow?
mm,
And so, and so it's like, in terms of my growth, Colin, it's like, I'm hoping to attain more awareness about this quote. And I think, me being uncertain about what is the intent for the expression is okay to be uncertain about it, because I do sense at present I am being supported in my growth based on my intent to want to do better and be supportive of the people I appreciate and care about. And, you know, not only people, but just life outside of myself in general.
mm.
How relatable is my interpretation and uh, expression overall to you?
Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate you.
Yeah. So yeah, the journey continues, y'all, and we got one more quote. Uh, this came in as you were talking, but Kenny said,
Free.
"Sprinkle me, man."
Can you more hipper than a hippopotamus?
Yeah, Kenny, I hope to get you on the show too, because I imagine
He'd be a
you
great.
got, yeah, he probably got some things to say. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I'm glad your daughter started crying. I hope all is well with her. We're
She's
about to wrap this up. Yeah, but so I appreciate everybody tuning in to the 39th episode of the Journey of Growth. Yeah, and I sense that I am growing as a result of me engaging in this unknown experience. Like, yes, this is the 39th episode, but it still is an unknown experience because it's a new experience. This is the first time that Colin and I have been doing the show together. And through my initiation of conversing with him and me experiencing his reactions and hopefully vice versa, um, some of his expressions were relatable to me, which I am using as a resource. And hopefully it's the same for him. And hopefully what is not relatable to me, which is okay, can be eventually relatable to me through more dialogue and expressionism. And so, and I think that demonstrates how there can be an openness and a willingness to uh, be appreciating of one another, um, if there's a sense of growth through the expressionism. And so, yeah, that's my final words. Colin, what are your final words? Parting
Uh,
words.
well, I just wanted to, yeah, just thank you so much again for the invite, for having me. I love, yeah, this concept, and just your 39 episodes. Congratulations, you're going to be on 40. That's incredible. That's really amazing. So yeah, just want to send, yeah, strength your way, gratitude your way around your continued growth, and yeah, and just thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So yes, we have concluded this end of the episode. Kenny, I'm gonna get your last one in because I definitely support this one. No, I'm joking, but it's he said
Uh,
class of 2000 is the greatest.
Indeed.
Yeah, but yeah, I appreciate you. Okay, Marcus White is in the building too.
Oh man,
Colin,
haven't
he
seen Marcus
said,
in forever. What's up, Marcus?
thank you for tuning in, Marcus. You definitely invited to be on the show too. Like class of 2000 series for sure. He said, love you brothers. Wanted to catch this episode, but Daddy Duty's called.
Uh,
It's all good. It's on replay on the Journey of Growth podcast. And if you check below in this scene, it says if you go to YouTube, you tap and you type in the search bar the at sign, the Journey of Growth, you can catch it on replay. So yeah, and yeah, I'll definitely be reaching out to people who are interested. Thank you again. Um, I hope everybody will enjoy the rest of the evening. I appreciate you all. Good night.
Peace.